Welcome to Satsunami. Hello everyone, and welcome to the 10th episode of Satsunami. Cannot believe it's 10 episodes already. My name's Satsunami, and joining me once again is my awesome co-host, Adam. Hello there.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I'm so sorry. I was so touched by that intro. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
well, thank you. No, good to be back as always.
Yeah, I was cycling through the adjectives there. I'm like, nice. It's like, nice, professional, awesome. No. Yeah, I was like, no, I'll stop at awesome. I know.
I was worried you were cycling through the sorry, that the word that you just said has completely left my mind, but different A words, and I was like, God, he could have gone to atrocious, abysmal, awful. I'm like, oh, thank God he stopped at awesome.
It's like, yeah, just throw my dictionary off the table. So yeah, as you can see by the screen, today we're really following up on our last topic, aren't we? So
proper thread here.
Yeah, exactly. We're building a very rich, what do you call that? The like Marvel universe where it's like it's all linked together.
God, yeah, that thing.
Yeah.
That Marvel thing.
The Marvel it's the cinematic universe.
That's the one. That's the phrase.
Yeah, it's like the Satsunami talking universe. Why not? You know what? Why not? I'm not paid Hollywood salaries to come up with these names. Okay, maybe one day, but not today.
Can't wait for stage 3.
Oh yeah. That's when we have to get our good friend Craig in from Beer and Chill podcast.
That's hopefully when I get my own spin-off as well. Fingers crossed.
Is that when you start your Terminator podcast?
I wish. No, nobody else wishes that, but I do.
One day we'll get there.
One of these days.
So for today, we are really expanding upon what we talked about last time. So last time we talked about video games that we wanted to see a sequel for, but at the same time, we did throw a lot of shade at a couple of other games that did have sequels, but did not live up to the hype, really. So yeah, this is going to be the episode where we take off our boxing gloves or the kid gloves, and yeah, just go at it for all these atrocious abominations of gaming. Which there are many. There are definitely.
They're gonna get it. They're gonna get what they deserve.
Before, we go into our examples, you might have seen a couple of spoilers on the screen. I did whip that up, so apologies. Yeah, before we go into the main, games that we both kind of came up with, I've got a question for you, Adam, and I hope you've come prepared.
Always.
I was going to say, what, for you personally, not even objectively, but just subjectively, what is the criteria for you for a bad sequel? Or, what makes it bad to you? Where you just sit down and you think, my God, that was awful.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I kind of started to think, what's it like to make a sequel? And honestly, this gave me a whole new appreciation, I think, for video game development. Because the more I thought about it, the more I felt, making a sequel, it must be bloody hard. Because I was thinking, I thought about sequels that played it too safe. And I think what can make a bad sequel is playing it too safe and just not innovating and not going any further. And the real question is, if you don't do that, what was the point in making it? You've just made a rehash of the first game. I think something like Dishonored 2 was an example that I thought that I was like, this is almost feels exactly like Dishonored 1. And I was like, this doesn't feel like a sequel. This just feels like some extra, feels like DLC. But on the other hand, I fear you can innovate too much. And if you go that far, then you're risking driving people away. And something like the Total War series for me, I loved some of the old Total War games, but I feel like they went in a very kind of micromanaging direction. And it felt like it had gone too far. For somebody like me, maybe that appealed to other people, but for me, it really has put me off trying any new games because I feel they're so different from the games that I liked. So I think the things that really make a bad sequel for me is playing it too safe or innovating too much. You have to find that really, really small, happy middle ground between the two. And you've got the problem dealing with fans as well. That adds a whole nother layer of everything. I think as well, what can make a sequel bad is the memory of the original. If an original game is too good, then there's no chance a sequel has no chance to compare to. So, and again, it's quite subjective, I suppose. But something like me, Telltale's The Walking Dead, that first season to me is perfect, and it's my favorite game of all time. and I love it and everything. And I enjoyed the other seasons that Telltale made of The Walking Dead, but they just didn't have that same like punch, that same like emotional heft, and like the attachment that I got from playing the first season. So yeah, I think it really is a case of playing it too safe, innovating too much, and then just how good was your original? All these things can combine just to make a bad sequel.
No, I totally agree with you there, because as you were saying there about the fans as well and trying to find that sweet spot, you're never going to get that perfect middle ground, are you?
No.
You're never, like, the whole idea of gaming is just so subjective these days. There's so many genres, there's just so many things that you have to take into account here. And it's like you were saying with the Total War series, I love as well. Like, I totally agree with you. I love the Total War series. I think my first one was Medieval Total War, and then like I played through Rome, and then Medieval 2. Medieval 2, I think, is where it hit its peak. Like, there was a couple of like adjustments it could have made, but overall, it's the one I enjoy the most, and I think that's where they were starting to strike gold. And then all of a sudden they came out with, I think it was Empire at War next, and it was just like, what are you doing? Like, having to micromanage every city. And again, like, that might be someone's playstyle, but I mean, for me personally, like, I felt it was a bit too much. That is the worry. Like, in one way, it's like, as you said, they need to evolve. Like, video games do need to evolve and kind of change with the times, but at the same time, if they evolve too much into one area, then yeah, it's going to kind of isolate the fans that built that foundation in the first place. And my god, fans are a fickle bunch when it comes to video games.
They are.
And one of the examples, I will like touch on it, but yeah, fans are very... On the other hand, like, I'm not saying fans are, to blame for bad, sequels. They're not. But at the same time, it's like, there is a lot of factors. I mean, I think as well, changing kind of trends as well in gaming. Like, I remember when we were growing up in the 90s, a cheeky BoJack reference there, but in the 90s, yeah, there was a lot of platformer games, and that's when, like, gaming was kind of evolving. But the further, it started evolving into other things like shooters and, different things, is probably when games were starting to try and innovate and evolve. And yeah, there's just so many factors to take into consideration. And by the time, it starts off in its early stages, I mean, do you, like, here's another question for you. Do you think that if a game started strong in a particular generation, but in a particular year, like, for example, a platformer in the 90s or, like, a shooter game in the early 2000s, and you compare it from where it started to what it is now, do you think that can affect people's perceptions of it being a bad sequel?
I totally think that the time the video game released has big ramifications for it, and some just don't translate well. I think it's a simple fact. I mean, just look at something like Duke Nukem Forever. Like, Duke Nukem was one of the most popular video game characters in the 90s, maybe like the early 90s. I don't know for a fact, but I would suspect that he was incredibly popular. And then look when Duke Nukem Forever came out, was it 2009, 2008, something like that?
Must have been,
the utter bomb it was, because it just didn't, it just felt so out of touch and so out of time, and just everything else with it. And I suppose as well, like, I mean, the game that you talked about last week with Banjo-Kazooie, the Nuts and Bolts, that was almost like trying to bring an old franchise into the present, but just in a horrible, horrible way, and trying to jump on kind of newer trends, but just failed, and just because it was a horrible mashup. It was a horrible mesh. It didn't fit at all. So no, I totally agree with you. Like, a time period for a game can have a huge factor on how a sequel, what's in a sequel, and how it's received.
Yeah, I honestly, like, that is a very good example you've just brought up there with Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Like, as I was saying last time, Banjo-Kazooie was this, like, big platformer at the time, and it was, like, really beloved. Like, I don't know if you could really compare it to, like, Mario or Sonic, like, like, comparable platformers, but it was still, like, massive at the time. It had a following, and for the longest time, because of company dramas and selling over and everything to Microsoft, there was so much to take into consideration there. But then when they came out with a third game, basically spoilers, that's not one of the games I've chosen to talk about, but one of the things they did was they turned it into, like, this weird, like, vehicle builder game, and it had, like, platformer elements, but it really stripped those away. And there's a scene at the very beginning where the like main antagonist, well, kind of antagonist, like he kind of makes fun of the audience for liking those kind of games. You know, like at the beginning he makes you like do this race and you're running against, you know, like another enemy, and then he stops you like halfway through and goes, oh no, 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 kids don't want to do this, kids want to shoot things these days and everything. And it's that idea of it trying to kind of break that barrier to be like, oh, we're still hip and trendy, but I feel as if they just stuck to their roots, you know, like maybe they would have just had a really successful IP there and they'd be still like milking the franchise to death now.
Oh yeah.
And we wouldn't be talking about it right now. And I mean, that's not to say like the game is inherently awful, but when compared to like the other two that it spawned from, yeah, there's no comparison. It's night and day, and not in a good way.
No, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that
Yeah.
if you try and make a sequel to a game that was of a very particular time, it's going to be like a disappointment or a failure. I just think that the evidence maybe weighs more towards it being that way because of expectation. I think that's the thing with an old game as well. Expectations have become so high. So if you just look at the hype that was surrounding Duke Nukem Forever, like compare that to something like Watch Dogs 2. Like compare the hype to those two games being released. It was so much, people were so much more excited. You know, higher expectations can often lead to bigger disappointments. So it's not a foregone conclusion that they'll be disasters, but I think unfortunately history has tended to show that they often can be.
I've got one more question for you just before we jump into our examples, but do you think, you know the phrase, the bigger they are, the harder they fall?
Yeah.
Do you think the same applies to the video game characters themselves? Like, the bigger the franchise and the bigger the face attached to it, the more consequence there's going to be for it failing as a bad sequel?
I think, to an extent, I agree. I do think that, again, I haven't kind of said this, like, I think for games that have a reputation and have built up a reputation, then definitely that is a big concern that you are going to just fall. It's going to fall completely flat on its face. You know, Banjo-Kazooie and I keep using these two, but Duke Nukem are like perfect examples of that because they are just so perfect examples. But at the same time, I think a lot of it depends as well as the frequency of sequels. So Call of Duty is a heavily established franchise now, but these sequels are churned out every year that I think expectations are almost dulled. You know, at the same time, I don't think as much as it's one of the biggest gaming franchises now, I don't think expectations for lots of people rise to those kind of those hallowed levels of being like, oh my god, this is our Lord and Savior.
Yeah.
You know, while something for these other games, if you're not seeing them, you know, like what's the typical time between Mario? Is a Mario game like every 3 years? Sometimes it can be longer.
It's something like that. Yeah,
so
do take their time, mind you.
Yeah, so that builds excitement itself. That's a huge franchise that builds, you know, excitement because we don't see one, you know, every year. I think frequency of sequels definitely is a big factor in that. But yeah, totally. I mean, you know, in the day, like if you go look at like a list of like bad video game sequels, you know, you can probably guess the ones you're going to see. You're not going to see things like Crackdown 3. You're not going to really see things like Ghost Recon Breakpoint, which are objectively bad games. I'm not that I played either, but from what all I understand, they're objectively bad games. But you know, like it's kind of thing. Who cares? Okay, these are sequels. These are a series, but who really cares? You know. It'd be far more shocking if a Mario game was just like awful, you know. I know there's some that people. I'm not as well versed on the Mario games, but I know there's some. But I'm sure those resonate. I'm sure much more than something like Crackdown 3.
Yeah, I mean, there is that idea though of franchise fatigue, isn't it? That idea that because there's this expectation that they need to churn it out like year after year. I mean, another example which I will probably get to later is Pokemon. Those games are released every, 2 years? Like, in terms of gaming, very close to one another. Like, one after the other, very just... I don't want to say rushed because, you know, I'm not a game developer, you know, unless one day I wake up and I have a hidden talent of going, oh my god, I can code and I can draw all these wonderful worlds. But there's just such a rush for, like, because it's a big franchise, so obviously they want to capitalise on it as much as possible. But it's the fact that they're getting rushed out so much that, as you said, it's like Call of Duty as well, or maybe to a lesser extent Battlefield, because that used to be...
Used to be pretty regular.
Yeah.
The FIFA games is probably, you know, a lot of sports
yeah.
games are year after year as well. It's probably a good example of that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's just that idea of, like, wearing people down. And I have to admit, like, when we talk about a sequel, it doesn't necessarily have to be, like, a sequel to the story that it's trying to tell itself, if you know what I mean. So, like, as you said for Call of Duty, not all of the stories are interlinked. Like, you've got different series. You've got the Black Ops series, you've got the Modern Warfare series, you've got, like, Ghosts as a standalone, like all of those, Infinite Warfare, Advanced War, all of those things, but they're all encompassed under the IP of Call of Duty. In that sense, it's like they're holding the banner, as it were, to represent themselves, if you know what I mean. It's like they're representing what they could be. Yeah, when you're like constantly banging the drum and knocking on people's doors at 3 a.m. saying, "Look, there's a new Call of Duty game out," and it's like, yeah, that's nice. It's gonna wear down on people, and especially the fans. Like, there's only so much. Even the fanboys, like best fans, are gonna get sick of it. Essentially, they are gonna get tired, and it's gonna sully their perception of as a whole. I mean, we've seen it in like loads of franchises like Pokemon, Sonic, Call of Duty, as you said, Halo especially. Halo's another one which I will get onto, but just that, I suppose, apathy, if you know what I mean, like just gaming apathy. Yeah, that took a very depressing turn really quick. So let's jump into your the first game that you chose. Adam, putting the floor over to you. What did you choose first?
So the first game that came to my mind, and it's funny because objectively it's a good game. Objectively, it's actually a very good game. And the reviews kind of reflected this, and it was widely liked. But for me, it was a disappointment. And the game that I'm talking about is Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus.
Ooh.
So I've probably told you quite a few times, but I am a huge fan of Wolfenstein: The New Order, which was the 2014 reboot of the Wolfenstein franchise, which had been in kind of hiatus for quite a few years actually before then. And so they got updated it, and they made it into this sort of alternate World War II, where the Nazis had got their hands on all this like incredible technology and were winning the war, and the Allies were on their last legs, and that's how the New Order starts, as this sort of last desperate attempt by the Allies to try and win the war. Spoiler alert: it fails. The main character, BJ Blazkowicz, goes into a coma, wakes up 13 or 14 years later, and finds that he's in a world where the Nazis have won, and they rule the whole world. And that's the kind of starting off point. And I absolutely love that game. It's one of my favorite shooters. It's probably one of my favorite games of all time, actually, as well. I love the story in it. I love the characters. The settings were really cool. I thought it was really well designed. The gameplay was fun. It had basically everything. Like, I just loved everything about it. And I was really happy to hear that they were kind of making it into a kind of bigger franchise. And so I think it was 2017 that the new Colossus came out. And I was really excited for it. And I got it on release. And as I say, like, it's a good game. The gameplay is still good. It's still really kind of punchy shooting, and the weapons are cool. And they added some new abilities, which made it quite fun. You could like a bit better to sneak around, or like pack extra firepower and stuff. But just overall, the game was a disappointment to me. Like story and tone wise, it's a game of two very different halves. And so the kind of tone of New Order, the reboot, was that it was, there was a lot of like kind of wacky, fun to be had, and there's kind of crazy weapons, and you're shooting Nazis, and it's all over the top. But there was this really like grim tone to it of like this world ruled by the Nazis, and it didn't like shy away from showing the kind of horrors that would entail. And it was really, at the end of the day, it was this small group of kind of desperate people trying to like fight back against Nazi rule, but really in a way almost accepting they'd lost. And this was just a last futile attempt. And it just really, it added a complete new level to a game that could have just been like over the top, super silly, and no real depth to it. And so that really drew me in. And the new Colossus starts off that way. The first half kind of has that same tone and everything, but then it has a very noticeable shift halfway through, and it becomes more that sort of wacky, like kind of over the top, and ditches all that kind of grim seriousness, which I thought was a real shame, because it kind of took away some of the kind of defining characteristics of New Order and what I really liked. I didn't find the setting as intriguing as well. So New Colossus is focused on America, while the New Order was mostly focused around Europe and stuff. And you traveled to a lot of different. You traveled to like London and Berlin, Poland, Gibraltar, like lots of different places, and you got to see all these different places under Nazi rule and everything. And in fairness, you do crisscross America, Fair point. But I just didn't find the locales as engaging, so that disappointed me. The game is too bloated as well. It's too long. They added a lot of side activities into it, but they were repetitive, and there was so many of them, and I said it was just bloated. It was just too long, and it kind of really sucked a lot of the fun out. I said, objectively, it's a good game, but it just disappointed me because it really just kind of ditched the spirit and everything that I really loved about the New Order, and I just found a disappointment, to be honest. And I was really sad. No, they released another one, Youngblood, which was not met with much praise at all, and I've not played it. So it was a real sad for something a franchise that I was really excited about at one point. It just felt like the kind of air was let out of the tires. So it was just a big disappointment to me, really.
And it's going back to what you said before about it being such a big franchise, especially for a lot of people growing up with gaming.
Oh, yeah.
And having that, like, I suppose, like, Duke Nukem, where it's like it's got the name to back it up.
Yeah.
Like, someone says Wolfenstein, and you go, oh, yeah, that's the game that you shoot the Nazis and everything. It's like, oh, yeah, like, the reputation is there. Yeah, as you said, it's like it's got a lot to live up to kind of impress people.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I suppose it's kind of similar in films as well, when it's like you set the stakes for the first one, and then it's like you have to raise the stakes for the second one. Think, right, how can we make it bigger and better and more bombastic? And sometimes you just like completely drop the ball, and you're just like, how could you do this to me?
It's the trouble of carrying a story on, isn't it? Because in a way, New Order stories could almost be a self-contained thing. Like there was potential for a sequel there, but it almost is a self-contained thing in itself. You could easily just play that and be like, that's a start, that's a middle, that's an end.
Yeah,
I don't need to play anymore. So it's that way of then being like, all right, we want to make another one of these, right? Okay, how do we keep this going? As you say, like, how do we keep this ball rolling, and what can we do? And I just don't think it managed it.
It's a shame, though, especially what was I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but like, how long was it from the original game to the sequel?
Oh, like the original Wolfenstein. So there had been a couple of other Wolfenstein games in between. So what's the original Wolfenstein, like 91 or something, I have a feeling? So let's say 91. Like there had been then I think a couple of, I say expansions, they weren't called expansions in the day, but a couple of extra things have been added to that. There was a game in 2003, which was a Return to Castle Wolfenstein, which was for PC, like original Xbox, a PlayStation 2, which it was really good as well, actually. It's good for, dated now, but it was good for its time. Then they tried a reboot in 2008 on the Xbox 360, PS3 called Wolfenstein, and that flopped. It was not good at all. Like they tried to make it into a kind of open world thing, it just wasn't good. And that's what really like killed the series for ages, I think for about 6 years. And then they got this one back in again. And this, I think, actually, Wolfenstein: The New Order is an example of how you take an old property and update it. And it's the perfect blend of keeping the spirit of the original, but, making the most and benefiting from advances and, making it palatable to a modern gamer. Sort of like the Doom 26 in the same sort of way. But yeah, just, I don't know, the sequel they just couldn't, for me, like, again, it was popular. So perhaps this is me just as a kind of solitary opinion, but I just found it disappointing. I still think about it today.
Those are the worst ones. Sitting up at like 2 a.m, just staring at the ceiling, going, "How could you have done this to me?
Tell me why."
Hey, nothing but yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to finish that because this is not a music podcast by any means. Not that you could tell by my angelic voice, of course, but yeah. Moving swiftly on from that before I have to edit it out. Oh, yeah. No, that is a good shout, though. Okay, so, yeah, you might be looking at the cover for this episode thinking, oh boy, I wonder what game Satsunami's going to be talking about. And it is Resident Evil. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, you nearly got me there.
No. Yeah, the ultimate betrayal. No, the game I'm going to be talking about is one that admittedly is infamous nowadays. Oh god, where do I begin with this? This is a game that I grew up with. I absolutely adored it. It's still like a kind of comfort game that I'll go to every so often. That being, of course, Sonic the Hedgehog. And I have to admit, like, when I played the original, so my, like, first exposure was my brother playing it on, like, the Sega Mega Drive. And then he ended up getting a copy of Sonic Adventure 1 for the Dreamcast. And my God, like I was so like glued to the screen and everything thinking, wow, what is this game, you know, and just really taken aback by it. And then, of course, years later, I ended up buying Sonic Adventure 2, which was, you know, it surpassed my expectations. I was like, oh, this is even better, you know. And don't get me wrong, it's got its bad moments. It's not the best. Like, none of these games are perfect, but see, at the same time, the thing that I do admire about Sonic, even, like, even though I'm about to, like, completely rant on it, the thing that I really liked about it was the fact it took risks. Like, compared to Mario at the time, like, Mario was just get from point A to B, whereas Sonic was, like, globe-trotting, going all over the world, trying to fight, like, edgy, you know, doppelgangers and things like that kept you hooked and interested. And then there was a game called Sonic Heroes which came out, and this is when my view of it started to kind of sour. I mean, I'm probably in the minority, but personally I'm not a huge fan of it, because in Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 they had like this kind of serious, well, as serious as you can for a cartoon hedgehog, but they had like this semi-serious tone going on. And then in Sonic Heroes it was like all of this, you know, like Saturday morning cartoon. Oh yay, we're friends, and it's like, Sonic, what are you doing? You're far too family friendly. To which I think someone from Sega must have been walking by my house at that point, because they went, okay, for the next game, we're gonna give one of them a gun, and it's like, no, wait. And it's like, this is looping back, because I was thinking this when you said earlier about what makes a bad video game. It's when they innovate too much. And I don't know if you could call it innovation. So it's like, after Sonic Heroes, there was the infamous Shadow the Hedgehog, which I think a couple of months ago, or it might have been longer, I like streamed on the channel. And I remember at the time not being quite lukewarm about it, but see, going back to it and playing it, it was just, it was awful. It was not worth it. It was worth it, you know, to go back and experience like a chunk of it. But see, if I had to play the full game again, I don't think I would have coped. I think I would have just been like, no, forget this. 10 different endings? No. And then, of course, you get the infamous examples where they tried to make Final Fantasy with Sonic the Hedgehog, which is the weirdest thing I probably said on this podcast. Yeah, they made Sonic the Hedgehog, or Sonic 06, which, again, I've streamed on the channel. And yeah, it is just as bad. It was not a fun game. Well, bits of it were fun, and I liked the fact they were trying to innovate in things. But it is weird, because I think the thing that makes them bad is the fact that there's no consistency. Which I know sounds weird, because I'm saying, oh, you know, it's really good that they are taking risks, which initially it was, but it almost feels as if what makes it a bad video game sequel is just the fact that they're throwing everything at the wall, and they're just kind of hoping that something sticks. And then recently, with games like Sonic Generations and things like that, they've realised that they can kind of regress back to, you know, cashing in on the nostalgia, which is a point I'll get onto with my next game. Yeah, at the same time, it's like there's just too much going on, whereas nowadays they're trying to play it a bit more safe. I don't know if you remember watching me play Sonic Forces, where essentially it was basically like a weird Saving Private Ryan with cartoon hedgehogs. It was like really, like a really weird tonal thing, and I think that kind of sums up where Sonic is. Like, on the one hand, it wants to be like this kid-friendly, you know, oh, look at us and everything, but at the same time, it still wants to go back and be like, oh, look, we're doing something different, we're being this edgy franchise. And at the end of the day, it's like, you can't be different if you're starting every game in Green Hill Zone, and you can if you keep bringing back classic Sonic because all the fans want them. And that's another thing, like, Sonic fans in general, I should know, like, I've been one, but Sonic fans can be terrible for that kind of thing. I don't know, like, how much you've seen of them online, but yeah.
I've seen enough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'll leave it there, but essentially, they're a very picky bunch, which I can understand sometimes, and then other times I'm like, oh, just, yeah, let him go. Like, let him pass peacefully. Which I don't think he will, because he's still such a recognisable character, so it kinda doesn't matter. But yeah, that's the example, definitely, that there's too much innovation. And yeah. I'm going to quickly extend to another game, and I'm not going to like spend a lot of time on it because we literally do have a full podcast episode based on this. I think it was either episode 2 or 3, it was about the Halo franchise. And that's like another example. Like, I think, see by Halo 4, and to an extension Gears of War, but, you know, like those kind of franchises are the ones where they're trying to build on themselves, but not in the right ways. Like, I mean, for God's sake, for Halo 5, there's literally a chart that tells you what you have to read to understand the story. It's like, oh, where does this character come from? Oh, you have to play Halo 3 ODST. Oh, where does that character come from? You need to read the novel. Like, utterly ridiculous for a video game. It's like, there's just too much going on. And that, I think, for me personally, that's what soured it. Honestly, it looked like, do you remember that Simpsons episode where it's like the guy eats the lemon and his face just like twists into this? Like, yeah, that was my face throughout the entire thing. I was just like, holding back the tears, just thinking, just, because I mean, yeah, it's just, I think it hurts more because it's like you were saying with Wolfenstein. It's a game franchise that you get really invested in, and especially like when you're younger as well, you know, like especially for me in the case of Sonic, you get so invested in it, and then all of a sudden it's just like you just watch it like slowly changing into something that screams at you and says it's not a phase, and it's like, you know it's a phase though, but it just keeps going and going, and oh yeah. Usually, the weird thing is, usually it's when they try to soft reboot. Have you ever noticed this? Not always. Like for the example of like Doom 2016, that's a case of obviously a good video game sequel. But there's a lot of ones that when they're making the jump from like one generation to the next, and it's like, especially for the case when Sonic was just like finishing with Adventure 2 and then moving on to like Shadow the Hedgehog and everything, and then when it leapt to Sonic 06 and the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation, it just, yeah, that's when I think like a lot of people just fell off the hype train for it. And yeah, it's just a shame. But I think that is like exactly what you were saying before. It's just that, I suppose, that need to try and make yourself so different. But yeah, it doesn't always work. That's the thing. It's like you do have to have that middle balance.
It does seem weird how the tonal shifts that have happened in the Sonic franchise.
Yeah.
Like, I'd known some of them, but just listening to you go through and kind of detail the games, it is bizarre. Like, I know I was just complaining about that in Wolfenstein, but you could almost expect it in something like Wolfenstein, like the Wolfenstein franchise. But it seems bizarre, the ups, the roller coaster of tone that Sonic seems to have been on.
Like, I mean, say what you will about like Mario or something like that. I have to admit, like, I find it bizarre how it doesn't really innovate that much. Because it's weird. Yeah. See, when it does innovate, like, a lot of people kind of think, oh, hold on now, you know. Hold on, wait a minute, you know, yeah. bring it back. Like with Super Mario Sunshine, a lot of people, not a lot of people, but some people considered that a bad sequel, but only because, like, I mean, it was well received and everything, but I think compared to the other ones, because there was like a lot of different mechanics that you had to kind of factor in, I think a lot of people were kind of iffy about that. So they kind of toned it down for like Odyssey. Well, they still made it a big sprawling adventure, but... And I mean, Galaxy, I think, came before that, where it's like they focus more on the Mario aspect than him having to have, like, a big water cannon.
Yeah, but, it was more familiar.
But, I mean, usually they keep to the core, like, gameplay of get from point A to B using platforming. Let me sum up for you the way Sonic's gone, and this is going to be a speed run of summaries. So... Yeah, you begin with, like, you know, the pixel, the 16-bit era, and, you know, it's literally just, Hedgehog, go fast. That's it. Point A, point B, defeat evil scientist. Then you get to Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, where you have to fight both a genocidal liquid monster and a genocidal space lizard from destroying the planet. And you're like, where could they go from there? Then they do one about friendship after that, which I was not a big fan of. Then they give one of them a gun to try and, you know, spice things up. It's like, okay. Then they give them hoverboards for some reason. It's like, okay, bit of a weird stretch, but okay, it's kind of a spin-off. Then they shove them in fairy tales. Don't understand that one. Then they tried to make Final Fantasy through Sonic 06. And then they just like cut back and go to square one with like a couple of the other games after it. But then they kind of go so far back that it's like every single game from that point has to have familiar old elements, like, as I said, Green Hill Zone, old Sonic, even though like the original Sonic does not make sense, you know, and that's a whole like topic for another day. But yeah, that's essentially the tones you're you're dealing with in this franchise. It's like such a tonal whiplash, and it's like I would say, oh, I can't wait to see what they're gonna do, but yeah, I'm holding my breath for it, but only slightly.
As a final kind of question, do you think they should try and make more, or do you think? I mean, obviously they will, because it's a franchise. But in an ideal world, do you think it's worth it? Do you think they should try, see if they can recapture the magic, or do you think they should just?
I honestly think like they're so far gone that they can just do anything, and you'll still get people who say, oh, this is the best game ever, which that's fine, you know, like if someone's favourite Sonic game is Sonic Forces, that's perfectly fine. Like, I'm not here to kind of say like, your taste is terrible. No, I'm not saying that at all, but like at the same time, it's like a game like Sonic Forces could have been so much better, and I think that's why a lot of these games kind of fall into the bad video game categories, like for a sequel anyway, because it's got the reputation of a beloved, video game character, and it's just like dropped the ball, because it's like, yeah, we could do these things, and I will get to another one after your next one, but yeah, like I've got another game that's the complete opposite of this, but you know what, I'm gonna end it there. Just let you go into your next game, because yeah, I could honestly spend like ages just ranting about it.
A little tease there for
oh yeah, of course. Yeah, that's when that'll be the next stream where I get you to play all the Sonic games.
Oh no.
Oh yes.
Agree to help.
So yeah, sorry, your second game.
Well, continuing this terrible train, I went for a much more classically bad game for my second choice, and widely regarded as a bad game and a bad sequel, and that is, as in the thumbnail, Resident Evil 6, which really was the low point of the low point so far. I mean, it's still an ongoing franchise, so it could hit an even lower point, but the current low point of the Resident Evil franchise. So it's just a mess of a game. It's just a mess in every single way. It was a real switch of genre. And in fairness, the Resident Evil games had been kind of slowly transitioning from survival horror into more action-focused gameplay from kind of Resident Evil 4 onwards. But Resident Evil 4 had still got lots of elements of kind of survival horror, and was very true to the sort of themes and kind of feel of the previous Resident Evil games. 5 went a lot more action-heavy. Although I still think I quite enjoyed 5. 5 was actually the first Resident Evil game I played, so perhaps that's why I have a bit of a fondness for it. And I think as well it still does have. It was starting to lose it, but I think it still does have some of that feel. Resident Evil 6 just has none of it at all. It's basically a straight-up action game, and it's a bad action game at that part. Most of the game doesn't feel like a Resident Evil game. It feels like a knockoff second-rate Gears of War. Your third-person cover-based shooter, and it's awful. It's another game that's too bloated. It's too long. So there's four separate campaigns in Resident Evil 6, all of like a pretty sizable length. For a start, there's too many characters. So you're playing as, because it was kind of co-op focused as well. So there's 8 kind of main characters. Oh, sorry, no, 7 main characters throughout the game. So the focus is all over the place. It's too many characters. You can't really get invested in any of these people. And as well, each of the campaigns tried for a different feel. So one of them tried to be more of a classic kind of survival horror affair, and it's the best of the campaigns. One of them is basically straight up third-person Gears of War. It's straight up that. And then there's another campaign tries to go for it's action focused as well, but it tries to get a bit of the older kind of feel of the older games, and that you have basically an unkillable enemy chasing you for large points, kind of similar to like Nemesis from Resident Evil 3 or like Mr. X from Resident Evil 2. But the thing is, with each of the different feels, the game feels so unfocused, and it's really it can be really jarring going from one campaign to the next, because you're just thrown into different things. You're like, oh god, it's like different games, and different games not done well. The gameplay for the most part is dull. as I say, it's uninspired third-person cover-based shooting, and it feels uninspired all around. And it was a slog, like just completing this game, and I saw it all the way through, and it was just a slog. And I don't. There's a couple bits that I enjoyed, but overall, I just look back and I'm like, my God, what a waste of time. What I could have done with those hours that I spent playing Resident Evil 6, I could have, I might not have written the next masterpiece or painted the next whatever Mona Lisa, but I could have played a far better game.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I have to live with that for the rest of my life. That I devoted all these hours to Resident Evil 6. So just an utter mess of a game. And yeah, again, I think it highlights that idea of just jumping on trends and just doing it badly. Doing it badly and when it doesn't suit your game. So yeah, but in a way it's good because Resident Evil 6 led to a whole revamp, which led to Resident Evil 7, which I really liked and is well regarded. And then yeah, I'm very excited for Resident Evil Village. So perhaps in a way, perhaps it was a good thing it happened, but I just wish I hadn't played it. And I hate it. And it's a bad sequel, and it deserves to be on bad sequel lists.
Could be misremembering this, but was that not the one where they had the Left 4 Dead 2 characters as DLC, like as skins for Resident Evil 6?
I do not know
think,
that.
but I don't know if it was. I can't. It was definitely one of the Resident, like one of the older ones. Like,
I mean, it probably would have been about the time.
Yeah. No, feel free to check, but I'm sure it was because I remember seeing one of these games and seeing the characters.
No, you're right. Yep.
Is it?
No, you're right. They were.
Because I remember seeing the Left 4 Dead 2 characters, and I was just like, that's just surreal.
Yeah.
Like seeing these characters that you've played in the other game, and it's like, why are they in Resident Evil? Like, obviously I know why, zombies, but it just seemed like a very weird stretch to just say. I think it was like a special mode. Could have been wrong because I've never played it. The only experience I have of Resident Evil 6 was, I can't remember if it was you or Craig that was saying that there's a scene where you're supposed to do a quick time event, and it's like if you don't press the button then nothing happens.
That will have been Craig because Craig was over at my flat. I was playing Resident Evil 6 at the time, and because it's co-op, he was over and we played a little bit of it. And yeah, there is a quick time scene where you're in a car and you're supposed to hit the button to drive away, and all the zombies are getting closer. And Craig just was like, I wonder why I don't hit this button, and nothing happened. The zombies got closer and then just stopped. And it was like, wow. Literally, a literal perfect example of press this button if you want to keep playing this game.
Yeah.
No consequences, but yeah.
That honestly reminds me of kind of in the same lines of bad sequels, but did you ever play Beyond Two Souls?
No, I didn't know. That's the David Cage one.
Yeah.
Cage and stuff, yeah. No,
yeah, I mean, technically it's not a sequel to the previous one. There was Heavy Rain first, which it's just an action movie, isn't it? Or a murder mystery kind of game. But then they brought out Beyond Two Souls, which is very similar, because it's weird. It's like in Heavy Rain, if you don't do anything, then there are consequences. Like if you don't, walk to the shops for milk, you might get arrested for running over someone, and it's like, wait, what? Really weird. Don't get me wrong, really weird things. But at the same time, there was consequences. Whereas for Beyond Two Souls, or as a lot of people have pointed out, Beyond Two Souls. It's it's so silly. But yeah, in that one, I remember it's like if you don't do anything, the game just kind of does it for you.
Wow.
I can't remember if you can die in it, but it's like there's no real way to mess up, if you know what I mean. It just holds your hand throughout the entire thing. And I do think that is the worst. Yeah, especially for, a game like that where, especially for Resident Evil 6, because I'm too much of a wuss to play Resident Evil. I mean, if you've seen me play through Outlast, I was just screaming the entire time. And just being like, oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god. But with Resident Evil, it's that kind of high action mixed with palpable fear at the same time, because it's although you can shoot the zombies, there's always going to be that Mr. X or Nemesis that's going to come round the corner and just ruin your day and piss in your kettle, it's not going to be a fun time. But yeah, it doesn't sound that fun that they're kind of taking that away.
It's really not. It's dull.
Yeah.
Dull is the operative word for Resident Evil 6, and because it's so.
Yeah.
It's one thing for a game to be dull, but when it's as long as Resident Evil, I don't even know how many hours, but it's must be at least 10. Mm. It must be at least 10 plus hours, and that is a lot of time to invest. And when your game is dull, oh my god, if you feel it, you really feel it.
there's nothing worse. I mean, especially, I can't even remember, but there have been games where I've like sat there thinking, right, I just want to speedrun this and get to the end, and there's just so much in between the end
Yeah.
and like the middle bit, which actually brings me on to which actually brings me on like nicely to like my next game. But before I go on to that game, yeah, is there anything else you want to say? Like in memoriam of Resident Evil 6.
My only fear is because Capcom have been currently like remaking a lot of their old Resident Evil games. They've done 2, they've done 3 now. Have they done something with 4? Or maybe they've remastered 4. I can't remember. My real worry is that they're going to get to 6 and just leave it.
Yeah.
Let it die the painful death it deserves. No, let it die the boring anonymous death it deserves. Like, just leave it alone. It was a bad, it happened. We moved on. It led to better things. So that's the only thing. Don't revive it. If you're gonna revive it, make it a completely different game.
It's just it sounds terrible, which I know. Yeah, that's what we're here for. It's like that's why I'm here. Speaking of like games that aren't gonna die, I suppose my next one is probably going to be a bit of a controversial one. Maybe not nowadays, but
ooh, I'm intrigued.
Have you heard of the small franchise called Pokemon?
I am aware.
Yeah, it's like this kind of niche indie franchise where you go around catching monsters. You might not have heard of it. Oh god, yeah, that joke never gets old. God, where do I even begin with that? This is so. I was kind of thinking, especially going along the lines of what you were saying earlier, of games that innovate too much or change too much to the point they're just unrecognisable, like Sonic, and then games that don't do enough to kind of change, which yeah, brings me on to, of course, the Pokemon franchise, which, say what you will, like, it is a franchise that has enough changes for it to be iconic per generation, but I feel as if they don't really do enough. Like, especially nowadays, I feel as if, like, with Sword and Shield, I don't know, like, how close have you seen, like, the controversy for the new games?
I remember hearing, I didn't really read all that much into it, but I remember hearing that people weren't happy with Sword and Shield when it first came out.
Yeah, it's like, it's just the usual stuff. It's like the fact that the animations are terrible, that, there's cut content and there's a lot of things to complain about with it.
Yeah.
And I remember playing it through myself, and obviously while it's not the best game, I didn't think, I thought it was okay. And I think that's what makes it a bad sequel, because it's like one of the biggest franchises ever that's leaping from one hardware, the 3DS and everything, to the Switch. And it's like, one of the biggest franchises can't get something like that. I'm not expecting them to get it right like 100%, but it's the fact that it's like a game that is, so prolific in people's mind that it's kind of banking on the nostalgia of, oh, the fans will kind of eat up anything. And you get fans, of course, and again, this isn't exclusive to Pokemon. Like, you'll probably get it in Resident Evil as well, or Sonic, or, you'll get it in any game where, despite the bad games, they'll still kind of vouch for them.
Yeah.
And say, oh, like, again, I know I make a lot of Simpsons references, but it's like, the one where Homer's cooking the pig, and the pig goes flying in the air, and he keeps saying to himself, it's still good, and he keeps saying it until this pig is just absolutely ruined. It's going through, like, sewer water and everything. He's like, it's still good, and Bart has to, like, tell him, like, just straight, he has to say, it's gone, Dad. And he's like, I know. He just, that kind of resignation of, just... And that's what I feel like, especially with Pokemon. But although I would take it a step further back with Pokemon Sun and Moon, which is something I was talking to a friend about. Actually, I was talking to them just before this stream. And this is a game that is, how the Pokemon games are, they're very, like, text heavy, because they won't pay voice actors. Like, obviously they couldn't for Game Boy games and things like that, but nowadays they still don't have voice actors. For, like, Sun and Moon, this is when they just took the absolute you-know-what with the story, where it was like, it's like playing War and Peace, but with magical monsters, where you're reading all this text
Wow.
going across the screen. Like, I was thinking of that just as I think you were saying, or we were discussing rather, the idea of you just want a game to end and you're mashing the button. There's literally a scene at the end of Sun and Moon where you finish the game and you think, okay, here's the credits. And I honestly thought that, like, it's the only Pokemon game, other than Diamond and Pearl, like, years ago, but it's the only game where I've been so thoroughly bored and wanting it to end, and then the game teased me by saying, oh, you thought that you were going to end the game. Well, we've got a post-credit scene. And it's like, where you have to go away and catch like something else. It was just, I was just like, do it, you coward, and do it. And it would not. It just kept going on, and it was miserable. It was just utterly miserable. And I feel as if, as I said, I keep saying with a franchise like that, and you might be thinking, well, Pokemon, it's like any other franchise, it's popular, but maybe it's not. It's like the people who are making it are still human and everything. It is, last time I checked, and unless a miracle has happened in the last 5 minutes of us recording this, it is the biggest selling media franchise in the world. It is like absolutely, it surpasses Disney, it surpasses Hello Kitty, it surpasses so much. And I think that's why, like, it would, if there were a standard, if there were a standard studio that just made, like, game after game, they're kind of in the same league as Call of Duty, where it's almost at that case where they're still trying something different, but they don't want to stray too far from the core gameplay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's just as weird to see these franchises that you grew up with, whether it be COD or Pokemon or whatever, say, that they're going to be, we're going to be different, this is going to be the next game, and then you actually play it and you're like, this is the same game, just with a coat of paint. This is literally the same game. And it's the fact that they do have the resources. I think that is like something that does stick when a game is like a sequel rather, is mediocre, but it has the potential and the resources. Like, for example, one of the games like I've like ranted to you about was that We Happy Few.
Yeah.
And I mean, don't get me wrong, that one was horrific as a game on its own. At the same time, was that not crowdfunded?
It was, yeah, I'm sure it was Kickstarted.
Yeah. I'm sure it was. And then was it not picked up by another studio or something?
Yeah, it was picked up by a big studio, which is when I think a lot of the changes were made. Though I don't think it was that good to begin with, to be honest, from what they had planned.
I mean, like, it sticks in my throat to semi, like, justify this game, but at the same time, it's like, at least, like, a sliver of hope, if you know what I mean. Yeah. At least you can understand why things went wrong with, like, with Pokemon and, Call of Duty and games that are just on a timer, even with, like, FIFA. Like, I think FIFA as well, they're set in their ways.
Yeah.
They've just, like, they're sitting on the armchair, they're just relaxing back, they're drinking the whiskey going, we've done all we can do. I think mediocrity with big studios is bad. Like, I do think there's no excuse for it. And again, as I said, I don't want to be like, I could do it better, because that's what I always worry about when we talk about these kind of topics. Like, I don't want to be shitting on people's professions and being like, yes, of course I could have made it better. Of course I don't, Like, I don't know the first thing about, video game creation, but at the same time, that is their job, is it not?
Yeah.
Like, the other...
I think...
sorry.
I think not so much like... We're not so much like crapping, I think, on video game developers, because I don't think they actually get to make the decision for the most part about, what direction the game is going, and that's made higher up. Mm-hmm. So we're crapping on executives, and that's fine. Like, nobody likes executives. Even executives like executives. I'm convinced. Yeah. So we're fine to like crap away on them. But I think video game developers get told, here's what you're making.
Yeah, no, definitely. See, the weird thing is, so there was actually a quote, just kind of quickly looking back to Pokemon, there was like a quote I remember. So one of my favourite games, and I've said this on stream and on record, but one of my favourite games was Pokemon Silver. That was like the Generation 2 games. And I loved them. Like, I adored them. They have their problems, of course, because they're like, what? God, you know what? I'm not even going to calculate it because it's going to make me sad how old the games are. They did come out in the 90s, early 2000s anyway, but yeah, like they remade them a couple of years later under the fourth generation, and those games had so much packed into them. Like, that is by far one of my favourite examples of it. And I think the creator of it just turned around and said, you know, oh, I just wanted to pack so much in. Like, you can get like a lot of Easter eggs, like the original music from, you know, the Game Boy games.
Yeah.
Into the game and things, and you get Pokemon following you. It's like almost the ideal game. And then Generation 5 came along, which was by far one of the most like drastic changes, which personally I love. Like, it's a very difficult game, but at the same time I thought they had a good thing going, but because it was it wasn't received as well. Although then again, it's like a drop in the water. It's like the Scrooge McDucks at Nintendo.
Yeah.
are just kind of like, oh, you know, oh, this game's not doing well. So then when they moved on from, so that was like when they moved from the original DS games to the 3DS, and yeah, it just like reverted back to bare basics, because they remade another game. I think it was Pokemon Sapphire and Ruby, and like they did it for the 3DS, and a lot of people complained because a lot of the features were stripped back, and they kind of teased at it. Now, I can't confirm it 100%, but the quote that seems to be going around is the creator for that one was like, and again, this is like kind of relating to Banjo-Kazooie, or Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, where it's like, kids these days are on mobile phones playing games. You know, they don't have time for, you know, complicated, you know, like mechanics and things, which I think is just such a lazy excuse for it. It's like, no, the kids will still play it. There's no way. I think that's what angers me, the way like that kind of franchise is going. And I suppose it's like when a franchise like that goes into autopilot. Do you ever feel like that when you watch like one of your favourite franchises just go into autopilot, and it just brings out the same game over and over again?
I think I almost like, just to be a complete cynic here, I almost think that's an inevitability with some of these, when they get so much money, like, you know, into the why would you change it? I mean, here's my question to you as well. I mean, and again, I don't, you obviously can't speak for like every single Pokemon fan in the world and stuff, but I don't know, do you know, is there like a clamor for there to be like a kind of change and overhaul to Pokemon, or do you know, people are generally kind of satisfied with what it is and are happy to have games, you know, just come out that are functioning the same and haven't really adapted?
There is, like, from what I can see online, there is a huge divide between Pokemon fans. You've got Pokemon fans on the one side who are absolutely content with just sailing along with the franchise and, you know, just saying, oh, Game Freak know what they're doing. Like, I mean, that's the kind of thing that really upset me when I was younger, because I remember I used to watch, like, a lot of bad films and play a lot of bad games, but because I was under the impression that obviously these were the experts making them, you know, like, oh, it's a film in the cinema, therefore it must be good. And, you know, like, I was an optimistic child, what can I say? But it's like, when you play these games, and as well, you see the potential. So the recent thing that's come out just now is footage for the new Pokemon Snap game, and like, some of the visuals in that are just beautiful. Like, I'm not a big fan of Pokemon Snap, never played it, so I've not got the same nostalgia, but I can't deny that it's a really beautiful looking game. And then you look at like Pokemon Sword and Shield, which is the main franchise game, which I think Game Freak have just got their claws into, that they're not going to let anyone else make a, you know, mainline Pokemon game, and I think that's hindering them. They've had like spin-offs like Pokemon Colosseum and Gale of Darkness, games like that they're not perfect. And I'm not going to be like, oh, if someone else had it, you know, it would be the perfect game. It wouldn't be. It wouldn't exactly be the perfect game. But it's that kind of stepping out of your comfort zone, if you know what I mean. Like, stepping out of your comfort zone and trying something new, which is exactly what they did for Gen 5. And then, of course, they got cold feet, and then they decided to reverse the decision and be like, oh no, we can't have a Pokemon game that's totally different. We have to, like, go back to the beginning. And I will maintain that, like, I think the final nail in the coffin for me was Pokemon Sun and Moon, where, I don't know, I mean, considering that is the game where they've got official art of a Pikachu getting killed by a sandcastle, and yeah, I'm going to move away quickly from that one because it gets me angry that Pokemon are trying to kind of be like half edgy, half... I mean, it is exactly, like, as I was saying, for the fan base, you've got half of the people who just sail from game to game, and, you know, it's because it's like, the way I imagine it is like Game Freak are like an artist, you know, they paint a painting, and it used to be for Generation 1 and 2, they would just add bits to the same painting. Like, there would be, like, overhauls and differences, but it would be, like, touching up what they already had. And then for, like, Gen 3, so whenever they go onto a new console, they always, like, throw away the painting and, you know, they create something new. But it feels as if now that's not enough, because it's like, they'll have something really good. Like, in Generation 6, they had this thing called Mega Evolutions, which was just basically like a Digimon evolution.
Yeah.
Essentially, where it was like, I mean, it was a really interesting concept, and everybody liked, well, not everybody, but lots of people liked it. And then in Gen 7, where the Sun and Moon came in, it was like, right, we're getting rid of that. Okay. What are you going to put in instead? Oh, we got these moves where your character dances, and then your Pokemon does a strong move, and it's like, but that's lame. That's lame. I don't like that. But of course, people went along with it and went, oh, Z moves, yeah, they're cool. You know, it's like a 90s, you know, like a 90s marketer trying to convince you, like, oh, look at these, like, tinfoil pogs or something. And it's like, oh, I can't wait to bring those home and put them in the collection, you know. But then when Sword and Shield came out, it's like, literally, all they did was they said, right, we've got Pokemon, okay. What if we made them bigger? And that was it. That was a big innovation for that generation. That was a big gimmick, and I think people now are just sick of it. So as I said, you've got the coasters, and then you've got the ones who are just like basically starting a mini revolution. But at the same time, this is the issue with bad, like, video games, or bad sequels anyway. The fact that at least for the bigger franchises, like, at least they can afford to make bad sequels.
Yeah.
Because this is the issue. Like, they'll make bad video games, and because people are voting with their wallet rather than... Because, honestly, see when Pokemon Sword and Shield came out and all these glitches and things were coming out, everybody was saying, don't buy this game, don't buy into the hype, don't pre-order it. But of course, it's a game for kids. Kids are going to see it, parents are going to, you know, buy it for them. They've got no chance. And it's this idea again of, like, they can just kind of coast and, you know, be lazy and comfortable. Whereas I think, and I'm quite curious to hear what you think about this, like, see with games like Gears of War and Halo, do you think they're starting to feel the pinch? Like, obviously they're still prolific.
I think certainly Halo I think is, and that's why I think they're trying to go in a very different. I think this is why maybe it's what it's taking so long for Infinite to come out. I think they are trying to go in a different direction because I think they have felt the pinch. Gears of War, I don't know. I'm going to be honest. I'm very detached from the Gears of War series. It's just something that doesn't really interest me. So I don't know.
I mean, blame you.
You played the Gears of War. How different does Gears 5 feel from something like, I don't know, Gears of War 3 or 2 or something?
Oh, God.
Does it feel like a different kind of game, or does it feel very similar?
Absolutely. 110%. Like, that was another one of those games where I just thought, I want to get this over with as soon as possible. Like, rushing through, and there was, like, big moments where certain characters died, and you were supposed to feel sorry for them, and you're just like, it's bold of you to assume that I care. But it was
it feels very different then.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Because the weird thing is, I like to think of, you know, the Gears of War franchise like the Alien films. The first one's more of like a survival horror. Well, you still get the guns, you get the chest-high walls, you know, and, you know, you shoot the aliens, or, well, technically not aliens, but let's not get into that. But you shoot the monsters, and, yeah, that's it. Well done, kid. You've saved you've saved the world. The second one's more like a big action game, but that had like a lot of really, emotional moments. And even the third one, although the third one was very mediocre, it wasn't the best, but I still enjoyed it as kind of like a finale.
Fair enough.
Nearly knocked over my glass. One second. I was just like, I was that angry. I was like, oh. And then they brought out Gears of War Judgment, which was like a kind of middling. It wasn't great. It was just like, it was there. It was a thing. It's a thing that exists. And I remember when I ordered it online, the box art came in French, and and I'd ordered it off of eBay. So I think this was like 2000 and when was it? Like 2014, 15. I think I got it. And I remember ordering it off of eBay and looking at the thing and thinking, oh god, what if the whole game's in French? This is just going to be... I'm like, well, on the plus side, at least I can brush up on my French, but fortunately it was fine. But yeah, it was not great. The weird thing is, like, it didn't spoil my perception of Gears of War, because it was like its own thing.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a lot of parallels between like Gears of War 4 and 5 and Halo 4 and 5, because they've already had like this self-contained, and I suppose you could say the same technically for Mass Effect. I haven't played much of it, but from what I've seen, it's kind of similar, where it's just this trilogy where the third one is it is mediocre but still kind of beloved by fans. I mean, for the campaigns in them.
Yeah.
It's still beloved because it's still like attached to that franchise, and at least then people are like, this is the worst this franchise can go. And it's like, oh really? The worst it can get to? Really? Okay, robots. And it's like, what? Yeah, but in Gears of War 4, we're going to introduce robots and all this, like, family drama that's gonna, rival a telenovela. And it's like, wait, no. And this is the thing as well. And I can't believe I'm comparing these games to, like, to, like, Sonic the Hedgehog or something. But it's, like, these games that are banking on the nostalgia.
Yeah.
And you can tell, like, when a game is so, like, it's not confident in itself, that it has to rely on like past characters. Like, for example, in the case of Halo, you've got the Covenant, which makes no sense. We've spent like over an hour in the other episodes of Satsunami talking about this, but you've got the Covenant who come in, and there's no reason why they should be there. There's absolutely zero reason whatsoever. But they're there because people know what the Covenant are. They're like, that's an Arbiter, that's this and that. I know they're called elites, but, it's like, there's that brand recognition. And it's the same with Gears of War 4, where it's like, oh, the Locusts are back, and it's like... Only, they put like this is what annoys me, they put a slight twist on it. So it's like, it's not the Covenant, it's like, oh, it's the remnants of the Covenant. It's not the Locust, it's like an evolution of the Locust. Which basically just... See, this is the thing. See, when a story wraps up, same with films as well, when a story wraps up and just, completely self-contained story, and then the sequel... It's a bit like... Because I know you're a huge Terminator fan, but it's basically kind of what happened between Terminator 2, which is... of course, like an amazing film, and Terminator Judgment Day. Sorry, I was just trying to remember what it was called. Where there's a line that sticks out to me, and that is when he rescues John Connor, and he turns around and he says, oh, we stopped Judgment Day. And Arnold basically turns around and says, negative, Judgment Day was inevitable. We only postponed it. Yeah. And that's what it feels like for a lot of these franchises that keep going. Like, they're not trying to do a new thing. They're not going with different characters or expanding the universe. They're literally just focusing on the cash cow, or space cash cows in these examples, and just milking it for all it's worth. And that's what really annoyed me. That, and it's 100 gigabytes to download, which I didn't realise when I bought it digitally. So, more fool on me. Yeah, I played 4, did not enjoy it. 5, even more so, did not enjoy it. Like, it's just so... Again, it's not as bad as Halo 5, in the sense that there's so much lore and everything, but there's too much going on. There's
Fair enough.
absolutely far too much going on. They have to cut it back a bit. You see, this is the thing. This is like, and again, this is a Last Simpsons reference I'll make. But it's, you know, when they're talking about Itchy and Scratchy,
Yeah.
like what they want to, reinvent the show, and it's like, so you want a realistic, down to earth show with killer robots, and we should win things by watching. It's like that, where it's like you're not going to please everyone. That's the thing, you're not going to please everyone, but at the same time, you have to have some kind of consistency there. Otherwise, you're just going to get a mess. I mean, like, look at Sonic, like, that is just hobbling along at this rate. Sonic is like the kind of like overweight, like 90s kid who's sitting there looking back in the good old days of like the Genesis and everything, thinking, I used to be a cool guy. And I mean, technically, I suppose for Sonic, it's got the movie.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
Like, and I did watch the movie. The movie was actually alright, but like things like that's kind of keeping it relevant. Whereas, and I mean, like with Resident Evil, you've got the like remakes, or not the
Yeah,
remakes.
like,
What do you call them? Like, is it a
oh,
remake?
they are remakes in a
Yeah.
sense. They are like remakes slash well, not really reimaginings, they're remakes.
Mhm.
Yeah, like I mean, well, Resident Evil's is in an upswing right now. As like a series, I'd say like it's a lot of like positive kind of feelings behind it. I don't know, some people weren't as keen on Resident Evil 3
Yeah.
and stuff, but for the most part, it's still on a kind of upswing. Well, I do think some of these other franchises are on a bit of a downswing, which is why some of them are trying to kind of reinvent themselves. And I think it just comes just thinking about like the last point, kind of Halo and Gears of War. It is that it comes back to that issue that we talked about earlier on, where it's, you have a self-contained story. Okay, so like over the first 3 Gears of Wars and the first 3 Halo, that's a self-contained story. But then it's like, oh, let's try and keep this going, and it's artificially trying to prolong it, and that's why, as you say, then you get resurrection of these kind of classic elements of it, and they kind of get jammed back in again, and it feels forced and doesn't feel right, and it feels very artificial. But that's because they have tried to purposefully prolong. They're trying to push these stories on past probably where they should, past their natural endpoint.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel natural. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying obviously all developers are like, oh, these gamers are just, oh, they're silly, they won't notice. But I mean, it is insulting when you see like certain developers who are just like completely detached, and they're like, let's just shove that out and then think it's gonna be good. Like, I mean, I suppose one of the infamous examples is what happened to the Metal Gear franchise.
Yeah.
Which I know we could like spend a whole like a whole Satsunami on that one, but my god, like I know obviously it was legal disputes and things, but when they went from a relatively fleshed out game to zombies, and that's
the ultimate example of innovating far too much. Well, innovating far too much, and I use innovate in quotation marks. It wasn't innovation, but that was
more spite.
Awful example.
Oh god,
I would have put that in if I'd played it. I would have put that in as a terrible sequel, but I haven't played it because it looked terrible, and I will not be playing it.
I totally agree. I will never play it. Then again, I'll probably never finish Metal Gear Solid 5, and not because it's bad or anything, just it's such a long game. Yeah,
too long.
I was going to say I have better chance of like completing Persona 5, but you know what? They're probably the same length. Probably the same.
You might have more interest to push through Persona 5.
One day, Adam. One
day.
Days. So yeah, final points. This is going to be another subjective question. But what do you think bad sequels, like going forward? What do you think these franchises, or just any kind of company who's made a bad sequel, what do they have to do to kind of pull up their bootstraps and fix their mistakes?
I mean,
like, I don't mean like
they need to take a good long look at themselves in the mirror. Number one. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. In an ideal world, there really just needs to be some like self-evaluation and reevaluation, and just think, just reevaluate and be like, okay, why didn't this work? It's okay to have it's okay to have a failure and to have a disappointment. Like, it's just, we're all human beings at the end of the day. Not everything's gonna be perfect. So just from proper time, just reevaluating and being like, why didn't this work? And then maybe moving on from that as well. I think sometimes you need to listen to the fans. Oh yeah. Sometimes you don't, and it's a very difficult thing because And again, this is a very subjective thing. I could be like, oh, you should listen to this fan base, but you shouldn't listen to this fan base. But I do think, but then again, like I'm saying that, but then again, perhaps you should always listen to the fans because they're the people who will buy your thing and keep your franchise afloat.
No,
I guess it really depends on the size of your fan base. If you have a big fan base, maybe listen to them. But if it's a small one, maybe don't, so you can get more fans in. I don't know. That's maybe very like mercurial, but I don't know.
See, I would kind of flip that on its side to say there's just one game that comes to mind with that, and that is Mighty Number 9.
No, fair enough.
Just where it's a game that probably had too much, going on, or like with the fan input. And it's the same with, see, when you look at Pokemon, like some of the fan games some people make, I kind of despair when I see some of them and they're like edgy, gritty, Well, don't get me wrong, like, I think it should be an all ages thing, and they have been kind of, I don't want to say violent, but I mean, you do in like Generation 5 for like the black and white games, you nearly get impaled by the main like antagonist and things. There's like some really dark stuff in that. But they do it in such like a good way that it feels natural, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I couldn't play a game where they're all wearing fedoras.
Wasn't that Detective Pikachu then? All I mean, not that I've seen it, but imagine they're wearing fedoras. Maybe the answer then is to maybe not so much listen to the fans, but to reflect on what made your first game, what made it initially popular. What do people like about it? And try and capture that spirit. Try and innovate with the time. Oh, God. Again, this is one of these things, isn't it, of having, like, I suppose it's having your cake and eating it, just wanting everything. Yeah. But, keep the original spirit, but do try and innovate with the times because it is important. Your game does need to keep up with developments. But don't try and don't do like or a Duke Nukem Forever maybe, and just try and artificially like force you like this horrible mashup of things that just don't work and don't fit. So I'd say importantly, think of the tone. Think of what made your game popular in the first place. What was the spirit of it? Because if you capture that, there's a good chance you'll be on to a winner.
It's getting, as we said at the very beginning, it's getting that balance.
Yeah.
Like at the same time, it's like don't be afraid to try different things.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Because I know technically, like, gaming companies might be afraid because they might lose, they might lose some either fans or they might lose money because it's not successful. Yeah. And obviously, like, some companies can afford it better than others. Just look at Sega and what happened to them. Which there is that worry that they're trying to like cash in on popular brands. I mean, look at like the way Call of Duty's going with like Warzone.
Yeah,
I mean, like Warzone, I don't even know if, I mean, I could be totally wrong, but I don't know if that would have ever came into their minds if Fortnite and Apex Legends and, all of those like games weren't hard hitters and, leading that kind of genre. Although I'm saying that now, but I can't remember when Apex actually came out. So if it came out after Warzone, apologies. I think it came out before, but you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, well, certainly Fortnite and PUBG were the ones, weren't they? So I can't remember when Apex came out either, But yeah, but you're totally right. I mean, I don't think maybe they would have come across it, but definitely I'm tempted to believe they wouldn't have. To be honest, if they hadn't seen somebody else do it, then be like, right, we want a piece of that.
Because I mean, was that not what happened to Black Ops 4 when they just made it completely a battle royale?
Yeah, well, that was the first big, that was Warzone. Maybe it wasn't called Warzone; was it called Blackout or something?
Oh, Blackout, yeah.
That was. You're right. That was the first time they did that, but it was a big part of the thing.
Yeah, we also have a podcast episode about that as well. I think it's like episode 2 or 3. I think it's episode 3 maybe, or it could be more.
Might be 4,
no.
Actually.
No, it was further along actually. Yeah, the third one was horror, you're right. I think it was the fourth one. I know. We're 10 episodes into like Satsunami. We're building the Satsunami lore here. History in the making. What a ride it's been. But yeah, definitely. You have to have that balance though to kind of break out of that bad like cycle, I want to say, because it's like it's that kind of like I don't want to totally be like critical and be like, oh, they're all bad, but at the same time you're like, come on,
unimagined.
Yeah, unimagined. Yeah, but I mean, I suppose if you were stuck with a game franchise for that long, you would be a bit lazy in some respects.
Probably. But also as well, like I kind of feel like if you had the chance, you probably would maybe want to do something because I don't know, like maybe not everybody, but I feel like a lot of people don't like doing the exact same thing over and over. Or maybe people do, I don't know. But I feel like human nature kind of makes you want to at least try something new. But then again, I just don't think it's a decision of many of these people. I think it's higher up people with their spreadsheets and
the graphs,
all that kind of like analytics and that kind of stuff.
Because funny you should actually say that, because I remember when I was getting really into Call of Duty, like up until Modern Warfare 3, maybe, is when I kind of like went off the series. Or maybe just before it, I can't remember. It was that kind of period. And I decided that, that way years ago, I mean, it still is, but you have that mindset of, it has to be one or the other. So it's like, for example, when you were younger, is it Pokemon or Digimon? Is it like Call of Duty or Halo? But in this case for me, it was like Battlefield and Call of Duty. And I remember switching over to Battlefield 3 and not particularly enjoying the campaign, but I liked the multiplayer, which is what swayed me.
Yeah.
And then I played the fourth one and it sucked horribly. Like, say what you will about the franchise, like Call of Duty and things, but at least it was coherent and I didn't hate most of the characters in that. Yeah, like, again, I could spend a whole hour just talking about how much I hated that game.
Maybe that's another podcast.
Oh, no, definitely. Just terrible characters, horrible glitches when it came out the door at launch. Just that was a bad sequel.
Should have put that one in there.
I know. Oh god, yeah, I honestly could rant about it, but it's been so long since I played it. Like, I do have such a hatred. Like, every time Battlefield 4 comes into like conversation, which is more than you'd expect, I just like retch. I'm like,
your blood boils.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just like, just no.
It's on Game Pass. I keep meaning to try it out.
You know what? Try it. We should do a stream of it sometime, and then you will see. All I'm saying is Irish. That is. That character is by far one of the worst characters. And then, before we wrap up, I'm going to give you like a juicy insight as to why I have such a visceral hatred for this character. The reason being that he is inherently a dumbass. He gets you fired from your position as like a captain, I think. He openly like yells out military secrets. He openly yells out in the middle of a city that's like evacuating, "Oh, by the way, we've got a warship." And then like he has the cheek to challenge you at every single turn. And it's like, see if you're making a sequel. Like, this is the one thing I implore. If there's any game developers that somehow, like, years and years into the future, like, start listening to this, for the love of God, do not make your characters unlikable like that.
Yeah.
Like, just play through it once, see what I mean for Battlefield 4, and just be better at...
Do the opposite.
Be better at creating, like, characters. And again, as you can hear by the very, calming tones of my voice, it's not a good time.
You're over it.
So, and basically in the words of internet scholars, get good. That's all I'll say. Get good. Just, please, for the love of God. Oh, goodness me. So, yeah, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. Would you?
I think so too. I don't think we're topping that.
Oh, no. Is there anything else you want to address?
No. I think we've really covered everything. Again, I just think it's such a difficult thing to make a sequel, a video game sequel. I can only imagine and sympathize, but at the same time, get good.
Get good. Agreed.
Get good. Come on now. Video games cost a lot of money.
They do.
What you can do is try and make them good.
My God. Do you know, this is honestly what I think. Like, sorry, just one more quick point. Like, see, when you see video games nowadays, like, obviously when you were younger, you would ask your parents and you wouldn't really know how much they cost.
Yeah.
Like, when you were really young, I mean, but... It's just like, now you look at it and you think, how much? How much? Like, but forget that. I'm not paying. Although, granted, I think I did pay, like, store price for, like, Black Ops, the new one.
Oh,
like
I
Cold
didn't.
War. Yeah, which is different because at least we've had like a share of fun out of it. I feel as if I bought that for myself and played it, I would be a bit more bitter.
You'd want your money back.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we've got a whole podcast episode on that about like the Cold War the Black Ops franchise. So yeah, feel free to check that out. It is a doozy. It really is like a top tier bad sequel material. If you want more of like that, then definitely check out the Black Ops episode that we did. Yeah, you'll see why we got angry. So yeah, let's wrap up there. Once again, Adam, thank you so much for jumping on. What is now the 10th episode? My God. I know I said it earlier, but I genuinely can't believe it's already been 10 episodes.
I'm just happy you've kept me on for this long.
Oh, of course, for now.
Here's for another 10 more.
Woo!
10 more reps. 10 more reps.
Yeah, I'm going to leave it to you guys, if you want. If you want Adam to stay on as a host, please.
Oh God, no! Don't put this to a popular vote. No.
please get a hashtag going, like hashtag.
Oh, well, it was a good ride while it lasted. I'll pack my bags now.
Hashtag keep Adam.
disappear into the wild, disappear into the wilderness. No, but thank you for having me back on again.
Yeah, no, jokes aside, like genuinely. No, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much. If you want to see more of my content, you can see me on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, of course, and TikTok under the name Satsunami42. And as always, we will be back again next week at around 8 PM, give or take, GMT. I'm saying that with bated breath, but probably we will be.
It usually is.
Usually, yeah. Without further ado, thank you all so much for listening. Stay safe, stay awesome, and most importantly, stay hydrated. Bye, guys.
Bye.